because of what happened with Joe Cox, everyone clamped down on far-right extremism, with the result that we're now getting more far-right extremists referred to the Prevent program than we are Islamists, despite the fact that everyone acknowledges, including the counterterrorism authorities, that we can't keep tabs on all our Islamic extremists and Islamists or people who might go down that particular rabbit hole.
Yes.
One thing Prevent is useful at exposing is the type of person who gets it sucked into this kind of thing, whether they're far right or Muslim. You know, they start, it's the same, and this is where there is a similarity, like listening to RTLM or to the Nazi radio stations. They're a little bit that way already, but harmless.
Yes.
And then they get sucked into it.
But that's the thing, isn't it? That's why I was interested in your piece where you talked about the senator that you were working with and the death threat that you saw. It's quite difficult to know, because, I mean, I get death threats. I mean, not very many, but, you know, I have had them. And it's very difficult to know how seriously to take them. Most of them are never going to come to anything, are they?
Well, that's the thing. The Australian Federal Police told Senator Lyon-Helman and told me that it is actually extremely difficult to tell, even with a very vivid death threat, and the one I've summarised in CapEx, which I won't repeat here, or you can go away and read it because it's pretty appalling. Even with a very vivid and nasty and fantasised death threat like that one, that was the worst one we received, it's actually really difficult to tell whether the person is just blowing off hot air, basically, or whether they're actually
drunk
going
or something,
to carry, or drunk, or had an argument with their mate down the pub or whatever it is, and whether they're actually going to carry through with it. There used to be a heuristic that the police could use, and I actually got my bottom kicked by police officers over this issue. And this goes back to the 90s, when I had death threats and abuse sent to my home address by the post over my first novel, The Hand That Signed the Paper, which is controversial. And the police did say, but this once again is going back historically, if they stick a stamp on it and stuff an envelope and walk to the post office and send it to you, there's two things going on there. One, they know your address. And two, they were willing to leave the house to do something about it. That's quite dangerous. The problem we've got now is that so many people have taken up email that heuristic of, here is a person who is willing to leave their house and be nasty to another person, a celebrity or a public figure, a writer or whatever, and here is a person who sends a nasty email to a person, because so many people are using email these days. And as I say in the piece, your nan's using email to organise her Waitrose deliveries.
Yes. And everyone, I mean, it's a lot easier now, isn't it? I mean, because the effort of actually having to put a stamp on an envelope, even if it's to post it to your office because they don't know your home address, I mean, that's quite... You've got to have gone through several processes there, haven't you? You've written the letter and you've gone... Yeah, I think I will send this after all. Whereas most normal people would go, do you know what? I've written the thing. It's like psychologists used to tell you if you were trying to fix your marriage that you should write something down and then burn it.
And then burn it.
Never actually show it to the person you'd written it about.
There seems to be a bit of an issue there, but it is extremely difficult to tell. And you finish up with the police on a huge number of wild goose chases, although there have been incidences, including one recently in Australia, where the Chief Minister of the Northern Territory, that's not a state, it's a territory, protesters found out his home address. So there is an issue with that, and gathered outside of his house and were being abusive and carrying on badly. And his wife and his kids had to flee. They had to go to a
And this is a relatively new phenomenon, because it's starting to happen here, isn't it, where people are getting visited at their houses by protesters who are not happy with them.
And you do have to be careful of that. And unfortunately, this is another one where you have to disaggregate the various aspects going on with it. Some of the reasons why people think that they can get outside a politician or public figure's house and carry on, rock their roof, the old things that teenagers used to do, rock your roof, and or TP your motor vehicle parked in your front yard, or your roses or whatever it is. That's the other standard one. The other thing is, people have seen the press pack do it to politicians and celebrities. And I did notice a few times, and I liked that it was bipartisan, so I will repeat it here. The behaviour of the press pack outside Dominic Cummings's house, and the same press pack outside of Jeremy Corbyn's house, where they were clearly camped on the front lawn, waiting for him to get in a shell suit and walk down the street to pick up a copy of The Guardian and a pint of milk.
Right.
And he's clearly not a morning person.
Right.
And they were trying to get a rise out of him. And now people see that and they think, oh, well, if they can do it, I can do it too.
Yeah.
So
which is not technically correct, actually.
Which is not technically correct, no, because, but by the same token, you can't expect ordinary members of the public to know that. And you also can't expect ordinary members of the public to react in the same way as journalists do. As we saw, like people see journalists mob a cabinet minister or a senior parliamentarian or the US president or whoever it is, and they think, oh, I can do that too. And you saw that video footage recently where protesters were mobbing Michael Gove, and he finished up with a ring of coppers around him because they're not going, that it looks really similar, but they're not necessarily going to react in the same way as a mob of journalists will. But you don't know. This is the problem, because the press has become so partisan, and that is also feeding into the polarization that you see on social media. Some of the worst behavior and some of the worst language that I have seen, and abusive language that I have seen, has not come from anonymous accounts on Twitter. It has come from people with blue ticks.
Yeah.
People who should know better.
Well, some of the stuff that has appeared under the names of people who should know better, as you say, people who are quite well known in the public eye, authors, lawyers, some of the vitriol that they've spewed about Brexit.
Just extraordinary.
It's amazing, absolutely amazing.
Just extraordinary. And I sit there and I think that...
Well, Philip Pullman, you know, the guy who created his Dark Materials, is one that I've noticed. He's not quite as bad as he was, but I think at one point he was calling for Boris Johnson to be lynched.
The one that stood out to me, and still does, and and the thing is, I have to admit, I acknowledge I have been to literary festivals with, and we've shared a panel and this kind of thing, and whose books I've read with attention and care in the past and actually admired, who's actually really just gone away with the fairies, is A.C. Grayling.
Oh yeah, he's completely lost the plot.
It's quite extraordinary. I'm sort of reading that, and I'm going, I'm waiting for the lizards. Are you going to say the Queen is a lizard next?
Oh, totally,
It's just
bonkers. Absolutely bonkers.
It's bonkers. But they are two different things. And the cartoon that I saw, I think it was from that Cold War Steve guy who just does funny graphics of the picture of the House of Commons with the elephant in the room, and it had Islamic extremism written on the side of it, and it was funny and we all laughed, but they've got a point.
Yes.
And the thing is, if it had been a right-wing person, as I think it was Rahib Ehsan pointed this out yesterday, we would have been starting to talk about, well, hang on, what's sucking our young men
But this is the thing, right? As of now, and I was listening to a conversation here on Talk Radio, I think Christo was on the other day, talking about how, when Joe Cox was killed, nobody was talking about Islamic terrorism, right? But when an Islamic terrorist kills another MP, people start to talk about right-wing threats as well, as if they have to somehow balance it up.
Well, this is this is a problem of both sidesism, and that's a problem in the press as well, which is a separate problem from being partisan and just going down one side. I mean, and you do have to talk about, to what extent should you restrict immigration? Should you use sort of education and social class as a proxy, which is what Australia tends to do? How much security do you provide for MPs? And I mean, I use the phrase in my CapEx piece, do you build a wall around the country, control the borders, or do you try to build a wall around every constituency, surgery or rock concert? And obviously the first one is much easier than the second.
Well, you say that, but it seems to be quite difficult for us to do that.